So we've got mastering Canva graphics. Look at some of those golden rules. This won't be a death by PowerPoint. I'm actually going to be in Canva showing you how to do these things. So looking forward to probably messing up a lot of things, but putting the pressure on me going live and demoing some of what these things from scratch would look like if you're building out those golden rules. So good design isn't about what's pretty or about what you necessarily like. There's principles, right? It's things that allow you to ensure that your designs communicate clearly so that you've got a message that gets across really quickly, really clearly, and there's not a lot of mistake in that. There's also some rules that don't change. It just depends on the size of the screen you've got, whether it's a tiny little mobile screen or whether you go into a big A3 poster. A lot of these rules translate across from one thing to the other. So we're going to focus on hierarchy. So the design hierarchy, we're going to look at the power of contrast, the power of alignment, and just how important white space can be. So we'll get on the way. Visual hierarchy. So the idea of visual hierarchy is that there's certain things you look at in order. And I've seen some of these really interesting memes that go, first you're going to look here, then you're going to look here, and finally you're going to look over here. And you literally follow the path that it actually says in there because that is where our eye has been trained to go. So whether it's some big headline that goes off into a subheading and then a call to action at the end, it's a very clear supporting formula that works on a lot of commercial graphics. What it does, it basically puts certain things at a bigger size and makes you go from largest to medium to small because we immediately psychologically think that the bigger the text, that's the most important information. And that's usually what we call the hook. So you'll go to the hook, you go to the supporting information, and then you go to the little thing. Even if they're not actually in top to bottom or left to right order, you tend to follow the largest to smallest in the order it'll be. So let's have a look at what that actually looks like in Canva. So I'm going to create a presentation. Let's make a social media post. Probably easier to do that. I'm going to go 4.4 to 5. It's a ratio for Instagram, also for, works really well on things like Facebook, on LinkedIn as well. And what we're going to do is create a background in there. I'm just going to take maybe an image of, let's just take this last image that I used. Okay, so this is someone who's in pain, they're telling you to step away or they're reaching out for something. Now, that's not the point of the photo, that's just adding a little bit of creativity to it. So I'm just going to put that in the background, reduce the transparency. I'm going to have 3 points in there. I'm going to have a heading is pain is real. I'm going to take that, make that a lot bigger. In fact, we're going to make it really big. So I'm going to double that in size, reduce it a little bit in that line thing. So it's going to be the first thing we really notice on that screen because it's the biggest. I'm going to make that that actual more black. So it's actually really, really is in there now. We're going to have a subheading. We're going to make that up above this. So controversially, it'll be above it. So we're going to make that a little smaller. And then finally, our call to action is going to be on the bottom, which is going to be a shape like a button. Pull out this one, a rounded square. Let's insert that in there in red. So what will generally happen now if we follow the hierarchy of what normally works, you'll go pain is real. There is something you can do and then act now. Now, some designers may prefer to do this. They'll put a hierarchy that's very obvious. They'll go top to bottom, but you can essentially put that anywhere. You could put the pain is real over on the left, and you'll still always read that first, regardless of where all the other stuff is. So let's grab all this, put it really wide like this. I'm going to put it in the background at the bottom. And then I'm going to grab my other little things and put them in here. And what we'll do, the pain is real, is still going to be the first thing we'll read because of the size of it. Despite the fact we've got a color there and the eye you would expect would go here, but it actually goes to the pain is real. That shows the actual psychological process we go through. Pain is real draws us in. There's something you can do as next, followed by act now. So even if they're in different orders, if act now is up here, you'll still go to pain is real. There is something you can do, act now. You'll always follow the largest to smallest hierarchy in that. So that gives you an example of what we mean by that. So as an example of the hierarchy, then it comes to contrast. So this is really interesting. So contrast is something that so many people do get really wrong in Canva. So the example would be if I go and make this image, it's full. There you go. So I'm going to put that right to the background. And now pain is real becomes really hard to read. There is something you can do becomes really hard to read because we don't have that contrast. So what we need to do, create contrast, is change the color to say white and move it around so we can actually read it. So we've got the pain now sits very much comfortably over his black hair, and it sits in the ears, sits in the dark hand and all that. So you can still see the pain that's going on there. And we can then go, well, what can we do to create some more contrast to make that work? So there's something we can do that doesn't have a lot of contrast in it. So again, we can create contrast by changing the color, makes it stand out a lot more because you've got a darker background. What you can also do is play with the background more. We could make that background darker by hitting edit, adjust, and then brightness can go down. That will always make it stand out a little bit more. A lot of influencer kind of people do this with their graphics. I know I do it all the time. You can also play with the contrast too. So you've got less contrast there, but it's still very, very readable, or lots of contrast there and it becomes a bit more arty, I suppose, but it's harder to tell what's going on and his face looks a little bit like we don't really know what's going on there. So we could play with the lighter, or we could just bring it to the center. We don't really need to make a lot of changes. The other thing is like things like temperature, make it more sepia toned or more blue toned. You can make it stand out a bit more. The other thing you do with contrast too, it's like we've got a background here. You can create things, backgrounds, and even lines around things. So the pain is real. We can hit an effect here and choose one of these effects. Primarily this lift one does produce a little bit of a shadow that's barely perceptible. If I turn that off, you'll see that it actually does make a very big difference. So if I go none, you can see that difference. It's just very slight, but it's enough to lift that text really forward. It makes it pop. We can change that to a shadow. That makes it pop, but probably in a really, not a very, neat and tidy, flat way. Or you do the outline. So the outline is that we take a black outline and put it around. Sorry, I just did the wrong thing. I changed the color of the text. So the text color back to white, and the effect which we're doing is the outline. You can change the color here to a black outline, and that will make that stand out. It's probably a little bit thick right now. We can go too thick or we can go really thin, and that will create that contrast for you. Now, that's not my preferred way to do it. I prefer to work with the elements I've actually got. So if I've got this element here, there is something you can do. I might create a background on that. Again, an effect, background, gives us a black background there, so it makes it stand out that little bit more. Or I could change the color of that background. So we had red before, we can change it through to blue or something else dark. What you wouldn't do is change it to something like this because it makes it really unreadable. Even light colors, it's a little less readable. Yellow, that's a little less readable. So in the rules of following that kind of contrast hierarchy, you go, yep, there's yellow in the background. So what I probably need to do to make that work better, to stand out, is change the text color to something darker, like black. Black and yellow is a really good combination for getting attention. And because that's bigger, it'll still be red before the act now will be red. So that is giving you an example of the contrast. Contrast in here is really easy to do because we've got great big text in here, which is really hard to ignore. If that text was smaller, it wouldn't be quite the same. But this one stands really well because we've really darkened that background. So we've created lots and lots of that contrast in it. But if we went and took that image back to what its natural level was, pain is real is nowhere near as readable there because you've got a white shirt. See how the letters kind of disappear upon that white shirt? We can put it on his hand and it's like on the darkness of his face, the darkness of his hair, and you've got that kind of thing. So that's the sort of things you can look at that can help to really make the text pop without you having to put really weird effects and like black backgrounds or neon effects or glitches and echoes and outlines and that sort of thing. So I try to avoid all those. The only one I generally will use is the lift shadow, because it provides that little bit of lift. It pops it out a little bit without it being too much. And you can adjust that just by going again on the effects and the intensity level here on the left. You can bring that back a bit or bring it forward. So you can see that that does change what it's like. So, and it's always a dark shadow. So even at full intensity, that's nothing too out there. That actually kind of works well. So that's then following the rule of contrast. Another way, actually, this is a really interesting one. We can change that effect into the outline, the hollow. So that could also make it stand out a bit. It gives it just enough contrast to be able to work, so you can still kind of read it. But then when you pair that with something else, so you can pair that with, you can't pair these multiples here. You can only have one or the other, but you can, use some of the apps that are down the bottom here, which mostly will have some kind of, need a pro subscription. Like that is designed to really pop. That's designed to really pop. These are very different kind of pops. They're less simple designs and much more complex designs that add a lot of busyness there. And even looking at this, because it's hollow and I can see through the text, that to me is just way too busy. Far less busy would be to go back to just that. I can still see my message, lift it a little. I can really see the message, but I can still see the image behind it. And it doesn't look quite so busy as what it does when I've got that hollow text. That's a really interesting variation on that as well. The idea is you squint at it. So you squint at it, can you still read what's on there? Pain is real. Yeah, there's something you can do. Act now. Yeah, you can. But if you can't squint and read that really clearly, then you've got a problem, because you want this to pop as it's going through a social feed or as someone's walking past it on a street or whatever you're using this for, a poster, a bus back, something like that. So next up is the alignment. So there's a whole lot of invisible lines and rules around an image that you can use. So I'm going to start a new one. We're going to do the Instagram post size again, because it's a really easy one to do. So inside here, there is alignment lines you can't see. There's snap grid lines. So if I go to stick an image in there, I'm going to use a different photo. Let's try this one. So as you see, as soon as I start moving it, lines appear and they give me the center. So it'll keep that within, that's sort of what they call like a safe zone. So I can pull this up and it will snap to the alignment there. So I've got kind of like that Polaroid effect, or Polaroid's probably more like, this is more like the Polaroid effect. But when I snap back to those centers, that gives us a sense of what is called a safe zone. So if you're doing printing or bleeds or something like that, you've got to take into account, you may have, certain areas over the top that you may lose some of that edge there if you went to the whole edge. Now, most of you are doing this for online purposes, for proposals, for social media, for printable posters you're going to print out on your own printer at the office. That doesn't become quite so important to you. That is the basic alignment. What I want to do is now work with what is called the rule of thirds. And the rule of thirds is kind of this idea that you've broken up this whole area into it's kind of like a tic-tac-toe. So I'm going to look at that and go crosshatch. Oops, that wasn't what I was looking for. So kind of like these, but it's more of a like one. So like I'll do it tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe. And you'll be able to see, okay, this is the perfect example of it. So I'm going to take this and we can overlay this over what we're doing. And it gives us an idea that certain elements you really want to highlight should sit in 1, 2, 3, 4, or at the intersection of these lines. So a little bit different because we've also got a not a square environment. We've got one that's not square. So I need something that's going to sort of fit better into that. So I might take something which is not a graphic, but maybe, yeah, graphic that I can stretch. Let's take this one, see if that doesn't give us anything. Go maybe something a little like this one. Yeah, this one allows me to stretch it. Stretch, stretch, and stretch out. So that gives us an alignment. What we want to try and do is place certain elements in our photos. So this will affect the way you take photos as well. it's called the rule of thirds, this one. So if you're looking for what it's called later on, what we're going to try and do is align certain elements we want the eye to be drawn to these places here where the lines intersect. So they're like powerful little positions where when they are placed there, they tend to be very satisfying. And it looks like a very well-balanced photo. So I'm going to take all these elements, just turn them back to really light transparency. We don't want it to be very visible. And then we're going to get some photos and see how we can arrange those photos to look really like very satisfying. So the idea, this one here, this photo here. So if I'm going to place this so it fills the entire area, and we're going to see certain elements are going to fall very close to where those satisfactory lines are. So the face of this guy, so you just make that out, is right on one of those satisfying points. So one of the features of this photo sits right in that spot. Like couldn't have even got it even more accurate. That's a photo that has literally been taken with the rule of thirds in as an idea. We can take another one. I'm going to go down and find some more photos. Let's go photos. Let's look for not office, something else, maybe the outdoors. So we can look for something. So for instance, this is a great example. So let's put that one in. So what we've got in here, if we've got those points there, I'm going to make that a little less transparent so we can see the actual photo. So pretty much everything is geared to within the bottom of it is there. And then the whole thing is within this sort of circle there. So everything that's important, people, everybody, a piece of everyone is within this area. But it's pointing there. So you're instantly drawn to the little girl's face there. Down here, the other daughter's face. And then the rest of it, there's nothing in there. That's plain. But you've got here very close to a face. So your face you'll be automatically drawn there. I can move this around this photo and move it right to the center. And while you would think that moving it to the center would be more satisfying, it actually isn't. So we do have a head, a hand, and a leg, but none of the faces are really sitting where we need them to be. So what we can do is drag that back again and see how it's giving us those in that photo. It's actually given us the rule of thirds, grid lines. So you can then put it there, that little girl's face. That's a much more satisfying photo. And it has, for graphic design, an added advantage. Let me take that out. Let's bring that all the way to the full non-transparency. You can do so much with this area here. Right here, you've got some room to do stuff with. So what will we do there? Text. So what it does, it allows us to put the text somewhere that is very satisfying in our grid. So if we look at our photo, again, to try to move it around, it gives us my grid. Oops, go. There we go. So what I want to do is try and get it into one of these areas here, because we want to get it to the crosshatch that falls around about there. So that there is fairly balanced. And you might say, well, maybe it's better up there. It does give us that left guideline. See how it gives that the left guideline? That gives us a bit of an idea. As long as we get in that region, it becomes a really well-balanced graphic. And we can add in other things to make that a bit more. We can add in maybe something like a text call out, and that will allow it to fill more area. I might flip that around so it looks like he's saying it. So flip. Come on. Can I flip it? Come on. You should let me do it. Usually it would let me, but that's okay. For some reason today, it's not letting me flip it. And you can flip that shape around. Flip around like that, maybe. And then reduce the text size to fit into it. So it's a little bit silly, but you get the idea, is that you've got something in that quadrant, that quadrant, that quadrant, that quadrant. So everything looks rather balanced in there, even if that graphic doesn't really look that balanced. So we make that like that. It can make that just a little bit less weird looking. Sorry, my mouse is just, it's not allowing me to move things the way I normally would. So there we go. Move that. There we go. It's a little bit more balanced for it now. So we bring that back and just wiggle it around so it's in that quadrant and looks like it belongs there. And it gives us some guidelines which really help with that. You might want to turn this around a bit more so it looks like he actually is saying that. And then center it a bit more so it looks good to the eye. So that then becomes just a simple graphic. You may want some more details in there. You might want to put, using your rule of contrast, you might want to make this a black background down the bottom to provide enough contrast to put information in there that you want to put in. Let's just say it's a website address or something. So www.gethelp.com.au. Black on black isn't going to work. So we might change that to something lighter. You might go, I don't really want something that, that black. That black is very, very jarring. So what you can do is just reduce the opacity. You still have enough of that contrast to help you to see the message without it distracting too much from the beautiful photo that we're using in there. So that's using another thing. That's using your alignment. You can do left alignment, right alignment. You'll see in the paint is real when I used left alignment, but I could just as easily use middle alignment. But it actually has more impact if you use the left alignment. So that's really, really simple things that will help you with some of those Canva things. Another example would be the use of white space. What I find is that this is the enemy of just about everybody in Canva. They want to cram as much as they can into a graphic in order to make sure that all the message is in there. But think about social media, right? You've got a text space in social media. You've got captions. You've got the actual text area you can use. So you don't have to fit all your text in here. Even if you look at all these in here, some of them are just so cluttered and they don't help us by cluttering like this. It's got so much information in it. You don't need any of that. Maybe this is fine. So you can move some of this up there, make some of this, sit a bit more over the top. We can change the position, bring it forward. And then we got a lot more room for it to be a little bit more relaxed. We don't even need to move those up. We could even leave those down the bottom and it makes the whole image that much more relaxed by not overly, just throwing in text everywhere to fill space. And that's the way I think we get is a lot of people think you need to fill the space. You need to fill it up with all the stuff so that, you've got all the information getting there. But this is a lot more relaxed now than when we had all that text all over it. We can still see the person. It just looks like a much more relaxed image than what it was before. You move it down and you've got a little bit of gap. So creating some white space doesn't have to be white. In this case, it's black. Making sure there's some gap between the word podcast and then where the torn area is. And then some gap between by Olivia Wilson and the information at the bottom. You can even take these three elements and bring them down a bit more just to create a little bit more space there. So it says then not that squint test again. You're only going to read podcast by Olivia Wilson. You won't read this stuff down the bottom anyway. So you can maybe find somewhere else for that to go, which is more centered towards it. So we could take all those items, move them up. Because remember the hierarchy is we're going to read the biggest thing first anyway, followed by the next two. So there we go. Move the whole thing down. And that's actually made it way more relaxed and easier to be able to see the elements we need to see. And the hierarchy will still go podcast by Olivia Wilson, and then the date and time information. Although in this case, you got an image, which is bigger than podcast. You'll notice image, podcast by Olivia Wilson, and then the date and the time as well. So that follows a lot of contrast rules, white on the black, the lime green on the black, really good contrast. We've got the white space, or just call it space. We give it space so you can actually read every element. It's not overwhelming at you. And it's also following the hierarchy. So it's following quite a lot of those rules. And that generally is a really well-balanced graphic without being too out there. And that's just taking one of their templates and actually making it a little less cluttered. And all that other information was on there goes in the caption below or above it on whatever social platform you're using. You don't need to jam everything into the graphic. The graphic is there to get attention. Remember the hierarchy, right? Hierarchy will be biggest through to smallest. And then the smallest thing again will be in Instagram, the caption underneath, or in the case of Facebook, it'll be the text that sits above it, or in Instagram, LinkedIn, the text that lives above it. So you always go to the image first and you'll follow that hierarchy, then following into the text in there. And ads work the same way on Facebook and Instagram as well. Don't jam all the information in there. I know that marketing managers and bosses and all that say, "Oh, get all the information." It's not enough information in there because they're probably not using social media themselves, so they don't understand the psychology of how people read through these different things. So that's the white space. We've seen a few examples of that. Now we look at designing for the scroll. So again, you've got the hierarchy and the high contrast that's in there, but we've got tiny screens. So what do we do with that? And this is where we try to use our margins that Canva's already built in. So mostly Instagram is read on a small screen, on something like that. So what we could do is take the image that we want to put in there and put some kind of frame around it. Let's put out one of our other photos here. Got too many photos of people in offices, really, haven't I? Let's go this one with a puppy. You know, it's a person taking photos, or it's a puppy, for instance, she was holding. I can expand it up into those guidelines. Now, the photo itself, if that's all we were doing, would fit the entire thing. So I could stretch that out to the entire area. So just dragging and dropping that in the Canva at the side will then fill that out. So great photo, really good positioning. Everything's in the middle. I would probably, bring her head more around to maybe where it connects with one of those intersecting lines. So that to me, whilst it's off balance, gives me room to be able to work with text. And some of that text would be, let's just pretend we're a photographer who's releasing new Photoshop actions now on sale. So your main point of call to action for people is getting them to buy these Photoshop actions. If it's the right kind of people, they'll know exactly what a PS action is. I'm going to align to the left. And I've got like all these lines are so far apart from each other. So I'm going to decrease that a little bit, bring it close together, make that a bit bigger. And I'm going to aim for this to sit in that gap. Now, there's a bit of a problem there with the line spacing. I want to make that a little bit closer again. That's a little bit better for me. But look, we've got a problem with our, excuse me, we've got a problem with our contrast here. So it's not quite right. Let's look at what white looks like. So white is even worse because there's a lot of white streaks through there. So is there some way that we need to put it down here? Which again, if we look at our ratios, sort of sits where this little intersecting line is. So we'll go in there. So that sits roughly where the intersecting line is. So that's a good place for positioning of text as well. Left alignment is actually a lot easier for people who are dyslexic and people in general to be able to read. And the other thing is too, is a lack of capitals, new actions, new PS actions now on sale is actually easier for people to read as well. Problem is, does it give enough attention? That's where we might have to go. Actually, do we need to make this have a more emphasis on the font that we're using? So use a much thicker version of the font and maybe make that text just that little bit bigger. And then like all bosses, they'll want to have some kind of, so we're again in that sort of intersecting quadrant is where the point of that is. And I'm guessing that probably a boss is going to say, I want to make sure that we've got our logo on there. So I'm going to pull out a logo. Let's just pull out one of my logos from here somewhere. Let's go maybe this little S thing. If that's a logo they want to have, again, you can go for an intersecting line here, 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 or here. Generally, logos fit really well in corners. Again, look at our problem we've got. See this? If I bring it in there, snaps there. It gives us that safe buffer space. That's that white space we're talking about around there. So immediately that looks more calm, more comfortable. This is sitting within the buffer as well. You can't see it. There's just no, it just fades. It doesn't really, and even there where it's got like a bit more contrast, doesn't look quite right. There looks good. It's an offset to the different, like on a diagonal angle from the bottom left to the top right. So what we can do to make that stand out about is we can use, some of the editing features. So edit, I can throw in things like a shadow. So giving us a few shadows we can work with that can lift it, a drop shadow. an outline. If you really, I don't really love the outline, but I can put maybe a white outline around it so it makes it look a little softer. Make that a little bit bigger, and the intensity of it or the opacity of it a little softer. So it's got a bit of a glow around it. That would help that to stand out a bit more. Otherwise, you've got a bunch of other shadows you can use in there to make that work differently. So, and there's filters and all sorts of things. You don't want to mess with your colors though. You just want to make sure that it's always in the same colors, but you're using things like your shadows to be able to lift it a bit. Shadow, angled shadow, curved shadow, backdrop shadow. In the case, it's usually a drop shadow is enough to sort of offset that. And I'm using white as my feature color. If I intensify that, that probably lifts it enough over those dark backgrounds to make it be a recognizable enough logo for people who are following this particular person and know what that logo means. So this gives you some of that. Now, is it boring? Yeah, it might be. You might find this boring. You might want a few more things in there. So you could add a few more elements such as shapes. Throwing in a basic shape here. I'm going to put a shape across the middle there with the reds. There's a lot of reds already in there. So it's a kind of a color that kind of matches the palette in there. And that could add something a little bit extra into it. Or you can then run those colors down. So you can look at your brand colors if it's red and black or black in there, change the position, go backwards, and then sort of fiddle around till you get it to its right. And then you could, that could be enough. You could get rid of the branding because you've now got your brand colors in place there as well. So the idea is not to clutter. Clutter is your biggest enemy. You're going to use things that are going to somehow move this. And you might want to separate out each of these lines into their own lines in order to help you to make it stand out correctly and sit correctly within the middle of those two shape elements we've just put in there. And the other thing is too, we can just change how it actually sits. So action is now on sale. So we can change that. This looks pretty satisfying too. Snap it to its position. And it doesn't quite sit within the sideline there, but we can always make the text smaller to make it fit within. And now it's fitting within. So it's again, sits within our comfortable factor. And we just make these a little bit smaller so that they don't look quite so misshapen. And you've got something which sits really nice. So that could be a really very valuable way of you doing it. And maybe move it down a bit so you're not covering the camera, or you can put it up the top. Putting up the top is you don't want that to be where they focus on. You want to have the feel of the photo, creating some of that feel that matches what they're talking about here. So Photoshop actions now on sale, and you can go to that particular photographer and buy their Photoshop actions, whatever the call to action is. And the call to action will be in the text of the post, not in text that's on the screen. You don't need to add all these sort of like buy now buttons and all this sort of crap in there. All that tells someone is, oh my God, an ad. Oh my God, an ad. It makes it look dodgy. It makes it look really like tacky when you start adding all these things. Even though Canva provides all these, you've immediately taken something which looks like a lot more upmarket and making it look cheap and nasty. Even if you match the colors to your brand colors. So we've went for that red to be the same as our regular red. It still looks cheap and tacky. They've taken something that was kind of good and branded well to something which is just, ugh, I don't want to buy from that because it looks like it's from Temu. That is pretty much what we've got for you today. So that gives you an example of some of those things you can do to make a bit of a difference in your Canva graphics. I'll be doing more of these because there's a lot more to Canva than just simply layouts. There's so many tools in there, like the tidy up tool, a lot of the things where you can take I'll just show you even one of the new features, which is very new in it, which is about creating layers. So I can go into position and where was it on the edit? And go magic layers. So in magic layers, it allows us, if I can find it, magic text, magic grab, magic expand. It won't let us do it to that, but you can load up a photo of your own. So let me load up some of my own photos and it'll allow me to layer it. So if I take the photo of me looking weird, I can then go edit, and magic layers will separate me from my background. And then allow that, they won't just remove the background, it'll actually create 2 layers out of that. So pro version only, you will need the pro version of this. It won't work in the free version because you get limited usage of it in the free version. It takes a little bit of time. There's a bit of AI power going on in there. And it allows you to operate separately the 2 elements, which are the background image, and the foreground, which is the person or me. So I can move me around within them. So there, you can move it around. It doesn't destroy the background. I can make the background a lot bigger and still have me sitting a lot closer to it. So, or I can then play just with me. I can darken the background. So there's a lot of different features that are happening here. Darken that background without darkening me. And I can then also brighten me up if I want to. Take a bit of the brightness, highlights. If I really want to make it pop. And that way you're able to interact with those different layers without having to be tied down to having to change the color or even remove the background altogether. You can just highlight different elements. So that gives you some ideas of what there's possible. I'll do some more of these in the future. We look at some of these very specific new tools that they're put in there. They're very AI powered, but are giving so much of those, the Photoshop and Illustrator kind of vibes, but within Canva as well. Don't forget, Canva also has a number of other apps they've now got. They've got an app, which is, they've got to find it, back out to the home. You can go and see these different apps they've got. So, and more, they've got, they don't have it listed down there, but there's all these new Canva things. So you've got new apps that they have, and that are helping to do more of that sort of Photoshoppy kind of stuff. I'm just going to find where it is. I cannot remember what it's even called now, but there's a Canva app, which is basically a full complete replacement for Photoshop. So when I find it, we'll do a little workshop on it and run through how that works for you. That's all I got for today. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.